The Nuremberg trials were missing one key defendant. While the war raged, millions of people around the world imagined the same scene. Adolf Hitler, the architect of World War II, standing trial for crimes against humanity. Politicians dreamed of his conviction. Soldiers in the trenches dreamed of his capture. It seemed inevitable that the Führer would face justice, but he never did. According to official records, Hitler committed suicide in his underground bunker on April 30th, 1945, just hours before Soviet troops would have captured him alive. But what if that's not what happened? Many believe that the man who caused the deaths of millions actually managed to escape. And here's why. Russian troops have already broken through Berlin's defenses. The Reichstag is under siege. Hitler, isolated in his command center, finally accepts the inevitable. The Third Reich is finished. He had already prepared for this moment. He wrote his will. He knew the fate of his closest ally. Mussolini's mutilated body hung in a public square alongside his mistress, suspended by the feet for crowds to see. Hitler understood that the same, or worse, awaited him if captured alive. Hitler's last refuge is the Führer bunker, a complex of underground structures buried 5 meters beneath the Reich Chancellery Garden. For 4 months, the Nazi elite had hidden here while their empire collapsed above. On April 29th, Hitler took a final step toward normalcy. He married Eva Braun, his longtime mistress, in a small ceremony within the bunker's confines. The next morning, April 30th, at 2:30 p.m., they entered his private office and locked the door. What happened next would be recorded down to the minute. Hours later, Hitler's adjutant and a businessman discovered them, both dead. The official chronology is precise. Eyewitnesses provided detailed accounts. The bodies were carried into the bunker garden. A canister of gasoline, prepared in advance, was used to douse them. Soviet shells fell nearby, but the task continued. When the initial fire failed to ignite, the Nazis brought a torch fashioned from no longer necessary documents and papers. The remains were placed in a shell crater and covered with earth. Even Hitler's 2 German shepherds were poisoned and laid beside him. Every detail was accounted for, or so the story went. On May 2nd, 1945, Soviet troops captured the Reich Chancellery and the Führer bunker. In Hitler's office, they found blood on the sofa, proof of what had occurred. Days later, unidentified remains were excavated from the crater. Soviet forensic teams examined fragments of jawbone and skull. Using dental records and identification procedures, they concluded these were the remains of Adolf Hitler and Eva Braun. The official investigation seemed complete, but then something unexpected happened. The remains were reburied, then reburied again and again. Eventually, they disappeared entirely. All that remained in Soviet custody, a single skull fragment with a bullet hole and a jawbone. By 1980, when Soviet documents were declassified, the world learned of this strange handling of evidence, the secret reburials, the destroyed remains, the fragmented bones locked away in archives. For the United States and Western intelligence agencies, this immediately raised a red flag. If the Soviets had truly found Hitler's body, why hide it? Why destroy the evidence? Some researchers suggested a disturbing possibility. The Soviets had found no bodies at all. The autopsy reports, the reburials, the entire narrative. Perhaps it was misinformation. There was no body, no certainty, no closure. This single fact would fuel decades of speculation, and it caught the attention of 2 powerful men. July 1945, the Potsdam Conference. Joseph Stalin and U.S. Secretary of State James Burns meet informally. Both attempt to maintain casual tones, but the conversation turns to Hitler. Burns asks directly, "So is Hitler finished?" Stalin's response is cryptic. He didn't die, but fled to Spain or Argentina. Burns would later recount this exchange in his memoirs. He never clarified whether Stalin was joking or deadly serious. Coming from the man who had captured Berlin, the ambiguity was unsettling. 7 years later, President Dwight Eisenhower made a stunning admission. The United States had failed to find reliable evidence of Hitler's death. In fact, he suggested, it was entirely possible that the Führer had escaped Berlin before the city fell. Think about that for a moment. The President of the United States was publicly acknowledging that one of history's most wanted men might still be alive. Both superpowers kept their investigations classified. Each side pursued its own theories in secret. And where there is secrecy, there is always uncertainty. And where there is uncertainty, conspiracy theories inevitably flourish. One of the earliest and most plausible alternative theories emerged from the physical evidence itself. In the Reich Chancellery Garden, investigators found a body with a bullet hole in the forehead and a distinctive mustache. The remains were identified as Gustav Weiler. But who was Gustav Weiler? According to some accounts, Weiler was Adolf Hitler's body double. In 1939, America published a mysterious book titled The Strange Death of Adolf Hitler, written by an anonymous author claiming to be a Nazi officer. The book made an astonishing claim. The real Hitler had been poisoned as far back as 1938. Since then, the author alleged, 4 different doubles had been rotated in to impersonate him for public appearances. At the time, the book was dismissed as fiction, the paranoid fantasy of a conspiracy-minded writer. But when a body double was actually discovered in the bunker in 1945, the narrative suddenly seemed less absurd. Consider the possibilities. If Hitler employed doubles for security, why not use one as a final decoy? While the double died in the bunker, the real Führer could have slipped away in the chaos of Berlin's collapse. The timing would have been perfect. Soviet troops were hours away. Documents show that Hitler could have escaped in the final days before encirclement. A body, any body with the right mustache and bullet wound, would buy him time. This theory, grounded in the documented reality of body doubles and the authenticated discovery of Weiler's remains, became the framework for more specific escape scenarios. If Hitler did escape the bunker, how could he have left Germany? The answer lies in one of World War II's most closely guarded secrets, the rat lines. These were clandestine escape routes organized by the Vatican and various Catholic networks. After the war, they became the underground railroad for Nazi war criminals fleeing justice. The rat lines were real, they were extensive, and they worked. Dr. Aribert Heim, also known as Dr. Death and Butcher of Mauthausen, who had tortured prisoners at the Mauthausen concentration camp, used the rat lines to reach Cairo, where he lived comfortably under the assumed name Tariq Farid Hussein. Joseph Mengele, the infamous Angel of Death at Auschwitz, escaped through the same network and made his way to South America, where he lived in relative peace. Adolf Eichmann, the architect of the Holocaust, followed the same path to South America. If these men with documented atrocities, men the world was actively searching for, could disappear and rebuild their lives, why not Hitler? He had resources. He had loyalty from remaining Nazi networks. He had time. The rat lines proved one thing beyond doubt. Escaping Nazi Germany in 1945 was entirely possible for those with the right connections. Of all the theories about Hitler's escape, one stands out as genuinely plausible, that he fled to Argentina. And there are reasons this theory deserves serious consideration. Argentina, in the post-war years, became a sanctuary for Nazi refugees. Argentine President Juan Perón actively facilitated the arrival of distinguished German guests. The country welcomed them. Resources were provided. New identities were created. The influx was staggering. Hundreds of war criminals, mid-level Nazi officials, and German military specialists arrived in Argentina after 1945. Some were valuable to Western intelligence services and were quietly protected. Others simply brought large sums of stolen Nazi gold and disappeared into the countryside. If Argentina could absorb Mengele, Eichmann, and dozens of other high-value targets, it could certainly absorb one man, even a man as recognizable as Hitler. In 1955, a CIA informant met with a man claiming to be a former SS officer named Philip Citroën. Citroën boasted that he personally knew Adolf Hitler, who was now living in Argentina under an assumed name. The agent was skeptical, so Citroën produced evidence, a photograph. In the image, Citroën sits next to an elderly man with a distinctive mustache and recognizable hairstyle. On the back of the photograph, a name was written, Adolf Schudelmajer. The CIA investigated. They found no leads. The case was closed. The photograph remains in declassified archives, tantalizing but unverified. Far more detailed information emerged when the FBI declassified its files decades later. In July 1945, just weeks after Berlin's capture, an FBI informant reported meeting an Argentine government official. This diplomat claimed to have witnessed something extraordinary, the secret arrival of Hitler and his entourage on the Argentine coast. The informant agreed to provide full details in exchange for a guarantee that he would not be extradited back to Argentina, where a coup had just destabilized the government. He had valuable information, and he wanted protection. The story unfolded in remarkable detail. 2 German submarines had arrived on the Argentine coast in May 1945, just days after Berlin fell. On board were approximately 50 passengers, the elite of Nazi Germany's leadership. Among them stood out a man of about 55 years old, accompanied by a woman who appeared to be his wife and several attendants. This man complained constantly during the voyage. His asthma had flared up. His stomach ulcer was causing him severe pain. Above his upper lip, despite careless shaving, the distinctive outline of a mustache was visible. The informant identified this man as Adolf Hitler. The delegation was mounted on horses and taken to a nearby town. From there, they were dispersed to a safe location in the countryside. The informant provided specific details. Hitler and his 2 body doubles were living in a house with a secret door leading to an underground bunker. The network that sheltered them was extensive and well organized. The source promised additional details. He claimed to know names, locations, and dates. He was prepared to provide a comprehensive account of Hitler's post-war life in Argentina. And then he vanished. The informant disappeared without a trace, leaving the FBI with only fragmented descriptions, vague accounts, and theories no more substantial than tabloid journalism. In his final report, the FBI agent who conducted the investigation offered a measured conclusion. Escape from Berlin by Hitler and Eva Braun the day before Russian troops entered the city cannot be ruled out. However, in my opinion, Argentina presents logistical and linguistic difficulties. The Führer spoke no foreign languages and would have attracted significant attention in South America. The agent considered Switzerland a more likely destination. Neutral territory, German-speaking, easier to blend in. But the investigation went no further. The leads were abandoned. The case remained open, but inactive. As decades passed without definitive proof, the theories became progressively more elaborate, and many of them traced their origins to a single source. A 1960 book titled The Morning of the Magicians, written by French author Jacques Bergier. Bergier claimed that Nazi leadership belonged to secret occult societies and possessed ancient esoteric knowledge. According to this narrative, Hitler, the most spiritually advanced of them all, could not have died in some mundane bunker. The tabloid press seized on these ideas and amplified them into increasingly absurd theories. One theory claimed that Nazi Germany had established a secret base in Antarctica called New Swabia. While this location did exist, its actual purpose was prosaic, staking territorial claims and building a whaling station. Whale oil was a valuable industrial resource for margarine and soap production, but conspiracy theorists transformed it into something far more exotic, a hidden Arctic fortress where Nazis preserved occult artifacts and planned the Fourth Reich. Grand Admiral Karl Dönitz allegedly said, "The German U-boat fleet is proud to have built an impregnable fortress for the Führer on the other side of the world." This quote, repeated endlessly by conspiracy theorists, has credibility close to zero and was likely never spoken. From this foundation, theories grew increasingly fantastical. Some claimed Hitler escaped to New Swabia by submarine. Others insisted he traveled in a Nazi flying saucer, referring to experimental disc-shaped aircraft that Germany was developing. The most absurd variation became known as esoteric Hitlerism, a pseudo-religious movement founded by French writer Savitri Devi and Chilean diplomat Miguel Serrano. They claimed Hitler was an incarnation of the Hindu god Vishnu, defeated temporarily in 1945, but destined to return in a fleet of flying saucers to establish Aryan order on Earth. Another theory placed Hitler on a secret Nazi lunar base located on the dark side of the moon, invisible to telescopes, accessible only through advanced technology and mystical knowledge. These theories say far more about human psychology and our need to mythologize history than they do about Hitler's actual fate. Physical evidence has withstood scrutiny. The jawbone. It was first identified by the assistant of Hitler's personal dentist, who recognized the unique dental work. It was authenticated through comparison with Hitler's dental equipment from the bunker. In 2018, French forensic experts conducted a definitive analysis. They compared the jawbone with X-rays of Hitler's teeth taken in 1944. The match was conclusive. The jaw is genuine. It belongs to Adolf Hitler. This jaw, now archived in the Federal Security Service of Russia, proves that Hitler's body was present in Berlin at the time of his supposed death. The skull fragment, also supposedly recovered by Soviet forces, presents a different picture. Multiple forensic experts have questioned its authenticity. The frontal bone is remarkably thin, too thin for an adult male, according to analysis. This has led some researchers to suggest that either the skull belonged to a woman under 40 or it is not Hitler's at all. The inconsistency is troubling. One piece of evidence is authentic. The other is questionable at best. The jaw proves Hitler died, but the questionable skull, the missing remains, the destroyed evidence, and the Soviet secrecy create enough doubt to prevent absolute certainty. This ambiguity is precisely why the conspiracy theories persist. In the absence of complete physical evidence, alternative narratives fill the void. Most serious historians accept that Hitler died in the bunker on April 30th, 1945. The authenticated jawbone, the eyewitness accounts, the testimony of those present, and the lack of any credible sightings of Hitler after 1945 all point toward this conclusion. The Führer was not found standing trial at Nuremberg because he was dead, likely by his own hand, as the official narrative claims. But the persistence of alternative theories reveals something important. The Soviet Union's deliberate destruction of evidence and decades of secrecy created an unnecessary cloud of doubt around an otherwise straightforward historical event. If the Soviets had simply preserved the remains and presented them transparently to the world, the question would have been settled in 1945. Instead, their actions, the reburials, the destruction, the classified investigations, gave credibility to the very conspiracy theories they wished to prevent. The Hitler case demonstrates how official secrecy, even when justified by Cold War concerns, can paradoxically fuel the very myths and legends it seeks to suppress. And it reveals an uncomfortable truth. For all our modern forensics and documentation, the most historically significant moments often remain shrouded in just enough uncertainty to keep the questions alive. Adolf Hitler never stood trial at Nuremberg because he chose death over capture. The evidence, though imperfect, supports this conclusion. But the mystery of his final hours and the Soviet Union's strange handling of the remains serves as a reminder that even the most documented moments in history can resist complete certainty. Sometimes, the most powerful stories are not the ones we can prove, but the ones we cannot definitively disprove. The truth about Hitler's death likely died with him in that bunker, and perhaps that is exactly as it should be.